You joined Adobe?
2017.
2017. So John came in after the CFO that was doing a whole bunch of transition and everything else with the business, which as a procurement leader, that was a little bit of a shock to me to have a new CFO coming in, didn't know what was going to happen. Why don't you just take a couple of minutes and talk about your pathway to Adobe, because you came through a bunch of really cool companies in finance roles as well.
Yeah, it was actually funny. It was yeah, Adobe's results came out today. They were very good, so that was good news. We were talking to a few folks earlier. Adobe's trying to find its way into the AI, pot of gold, like a lot of companies are. But I think they will find their way. One of the things we had at Adobe for a long time was Sensei is what we called it, which was embedded machine learning within our products for a long, long time. And so AI, full AI, which is now Firefly, was just a natural evolution for that. But my path was kind of interesting. I started in public accounting, like a lot of people do, and went to one of my clients early on. And then my first stint up in Silicon Valley was with a company called JDS Uniphase that was the early, in the dot-com boom, it was going to be essentially the Intel of networking. And they did really well for a while. And then, of course, the whole network was overbuilt and dot-com bubble burst. And JDS Uniphase, nobody wanted their networking products anymore, and so they tanked, and so that was like really depressing. And so I regrouped, I went back to Southern California, and I ended up joining DirecTV, and I was there for the longest stretch of my career, almost 11 years. And then we were bought. It was great, a really interesting company too, and I'll segue to Adobe after that, but it was really fascinating. DirecTV was spun off from Hughes Corporation, which was mostly aerospace and defense. And DirecTV was this incubated business unit to try to monetize their technology that they were using in defense. And then they said, hey, wait, we can send up, satellites into space and have a consumer product that we can broadcast better than cable and HD and all this other capacity. And so super successful for a long time. So much so that they were spun out, News Corp bought them. Then Rupert Murdoch and John Malone from Liberty Media got into a fight. They swapped shares, and so then all of a sudden we're owned by Liberty Media. And then Liberty Media just wants to make money all the time and also get tax benefits in their structuring. So they did a whole wacky deal to spin us off, publicly. So we're independent for the first time in our entire history. At that point, we're probably like 25 years old. And no, 20 years old. And so then next thing you know, AT&T came knocking, and they got bought. I was the chief accounting officer at the time, so I knew my job was going away. And they said, well, no, we'll find a job for you, but you have to go to Dallas. I'm like, oh no. I grew up in New York. I moved to California. I'm an East and a West Coast guy, so Dallas was not in the cards. So I ended up, I got recruited during that whole process. Once the deal was in process, I got recruited to Qualcomm in San Diego. That's where I met Anubhav. And joined Qualcomm actually in crisis mode, which I didn't realize it was a crisis at the time, but there were...
Welcome.
Yeah, it was insane. I got recruited to Adobe, and I'm like, okay, I need to get out of crisis mode and go to a growth company. And because as much as we did such great work at Qualcomm, it was painful because it involved a lot of layoffs and a lot of relocation. And I'm much more interested, like I'm sure most people, in growth and the excitement of contributing to growth. So when Adobe came by, and they had just more or less a few years into the transition, we're really kind of now on a really great trajectory in software as a service and subscription. I was like, okay, this sounds really interesting. This is definitely where the market's going. Love the team, love the culture. It actually was very similar to the DirecTV culture, which I think Qualcomm had at one point, but in crisis mode, cultures get impacted. And so no bad words about Qualcomm. It was just a bad time. It's a great company, great people, but it was like not a fun company to be in at that time. So I go to Adobe, I'm like, oh my God, this is just like it was at DirecTV. I love it. People have energy. They're creative. There's a lot of autonomy within functions. There was not a lot of micromanaging. And so this is good. They hire good people, let good people do the good work, and just communicate and make sure you stay on top of it. Months in, I became CFO and had a really just great, incredible time. And of course, COVID hit during my tenure as well. So that was a weird thing, being CFO remotely, like all of us, weird jobs remotely for a while. So I went back to my house in Southern California, thinking it was going to be like everybody, a few months, 6 months, whatever. 2 years. And then we're like, okay, we're going to reopen the office. And we were just building that nice new giant building down in San Jose. And I was like, I just don't want to commute back and forth again to Southern California. So I said, no, I'm going to I'm going to take a pause here and focus on myself a little bit, but also kind of shift gears to what I wanted to do ultimately, kind of in the next chapter 2, if you will, was board work. And so I'm on the board of 3 public companies and 1 private company and 2 nonprofits, and it provides me a lot of flexibility in my personal life, but it keeps me connected to business and leveraging my experience that I had. So that's my quick resume.
So that's quite a journey.
Yeah.
And across, like going back to the DirecTV
Yeah.
and the Qualcomm and the Adobe jobs, as you were, I'm sure, interacting and working with procurement through that
Oh, yeah.
process. As you came into those teams, how did you think about it? What were you looking at procurement? I mean, I think one of the really important things for us to understand as a procurement function is, what does finance leadership need from us?
Yeah.
How do you really look at us? I mean, there's a traditional conversation about cost savings. Is that really what you need, is cost savings? What do you expect? And how does that look from this office of the CFO? And how does that look from now you're in all these board positions?
Yeah. It really, very timely. I had 2 board meetings this week up here, and so procurement was involved in all of them, by the way, in terms of topics, and particularly the chart that you showed around compliance. That chart was very similar. The 2 different companies had very, very similar charts. I don't know if you're using the same supplier to help them, but it was very, very close. But the interesting thing is, in my entire career, procurement was very much a transactional function and wasn't being leveraged strategically. And there are several functions in finance that that lumped into that, and it's like accounting is just traditional accounting, and financial planning, just doing financial planning, and oftentimes, depending on the business, finance in general is basically you're a service, just do what we tell you to do, et cetera. And that shifted over time, where different companies recognized they could actually leverage the skills of financial people and financial organizations and just general analytical people and organizations to drive value in their companies. And so the CFO organization became a little bit more of a strategic partner to the CEO, also to the CROs in terms of how they go out into business and negotiate terms with big customers and long multi-year contracts. And so finance and different functions started to elevate in terms of the value they were contributing, and procurement in particular really started to elevate from transaction, just get this done, get it done compliantly, and be done with it, and became kind of drive cost savings. We want to have this the most efficient, the most cost effective, leverage our scale. That's always the favorite thing I'm sure you guys heard all the time. We're huge, we should be paying that, we should be paying less. And I'm sure you still hear that, but nonetheless, I feel like it has shifted over the years to now where various functions, yours very, very specifically, is a very strategic asset to any organization to be able to not only drive effective cost management, and I'm specifically saying not cost savings, because it's really effective cost management, because it affects everything. And I was really happy to hear that you have direct and indirect procurement, because you're impacting the margin of the products. And that's extremely valuable to the CEO. Some companies have not modernized to the thought that we should combine this, because the skill sets are absolutely the same. And I think the theories are so critically important to be unified. When they're divided, and in companies that say, well, we don't want procurement doing this because they're not marketing experts, or they're not HR experts, when we think about contract labor and things like that, or we think about event planning or advertising, when they don't leverage the skill sets of procurement people, then it gets so distributed, and you're really not capturing the impact that you can have on not only the cost of your products, so in the gross margin space, but the ultimate net operating margin of the company in terms of its efficiency and profitability. So the elevation of procurement to a strategic partner in the space, and it's evolving, and I think you guys sound like you're very evolved here, which is great. I'd encourage you to continue to lobby for that. And CFOs today are always trying to figure out, how can I accelerate the performance of my company? And it's going to be collapsing the thought process into a single thought process that can be distributed in terms of execution, but you need someone leading that thought process, and I think you guys are best positioned to be able to do that.
It's cool how procurement kind of sits in the center of the business that way, touching all the different functions. Absolutely. Sure. So there, in the room here, there's folks that are supporting procurement in really small organizations, sort of startup mode, to very large organizations. And now that you're on a board of both kinds of companies, how any advice to the smaller building transforming in terms of how to look and do that versus kind of at the other end of the continuum?
Yeah, so definitely put time on the calendar of the CFO and the CIO for sure, depending if you're tech companies. One of my board them on that's a private company has direct and indirect very separate. It worked okay for the size that they were at the time, but now they're actually growing at a really nice pace. And we're trying to think about, okay, do we want to go IPO or do we want to look for a strategic buyer for the company? And we want to obviously get the best price for the company, for the shareholders, and obviously for the management team that really founded and started this company. And we unified it. We brought in a person that had both direct and indirect experience, consolidated that operation. And what we found in that process, and it was really not against the head of engineering who had all of the direct procurement, he was legitimately knowledgeable about what he needed from both hardware and software to be able to work on the service that we were providing to our customers. But he was also the type of person that was given a lot of latitude in terms of product development and kind of proliferating the product lifecycle a little bit and not understanding when are we going to be able to monetize that. So by unifying it, the person that took over total procurement was able to say, well, what is the plan here? When are we going to monetize it? Because that helps me understand how hard I should be negotiating early, so I can start maybe with somebody who says, hey, this is not even development, we're not making any money on this, what can we have the service for? How sustainable is the supply chain of those services so that we can make sure that we can deliver if it takes off? So in the early stages where you're at this shifting point of a certain size, I think you can be part of the equation in terms of what does your company look like 5 years from now? And I think that's probably the question you need to ask both the CEO, CFO, CIO. What are we going to look like? And then how would my organization fit into helping you get to where you want to go? I think that's one conversation. One of my other companies is a little larger, quite a bit larger. It is separated. And I keep asking them, when are you going to unify it? When are you going to bring it back together? And they're finally moving towards that because they see the value in it and unifying the thought process around it. But it's hard because people are territorial. And when they've had it, they don't want to give it up. Yeah. So, as you said, I think the key here is being very open and letting them trust you and recognizing that you're their partner. And when you deliver for them, they're going to keep coming back for more, to your point.
Yeah, I've always said the role of procurement is to enable business success.
Yeah.
In the early days of my career, it was all about cost savings. And kind of sometimes cost savings is what the business needs to be successful, yeah. But often it's speed, agility, innovation, a bunch of other things that kind of contribute into savings and value. And really understanding that is super critical. Why don't we take some...
I was just going to say, just on that, on the cost savings piece, so don't want to lose sight of kind of the beginnings of procurement, right? If you find that your company's in some type of crisis mode too, you are the first person that should be jumping up and down saying, I can help here. Because you don't necessarily want all the C-suite noodling this about, and you're like, I know where there's savings, and you need to get that out front, and that'll also demonstrate the value of the function. I think that's really important.
Yeah, having that vision even in advance of that.
Yeah.
Questions for John? Sure. Sarah?
2 top priorities for CFOs this year.
Oh, gosh. So interestingly, we're in a weird cycle in some companies, but I'll go with tech. There's still a shortage of talent, and so when you think about a lot of the service that some of these companies here are providing, it is being built off of brain power, and so we need to be able to find and source where that talent's going to be. We don't obviously want to hire them all as employees because we don't, cycles and economies. So I think, talent sourcing is really critical. Power sourcing is very critical right now, particularly because of ESG requirements. So that's something that we need to think about in terms of alternative sources and locations. And so I think that all contributes to how do we, as a company, especially if you're a public company, how are we actually shifting our operations so that we are not only compliant, but that we're actually attractive to investors that those things are important for. So certain investor funds will not invest in companies that do not have programs to comply with ESG requirements in various locations. You really kind of lose a whole group of funds that will do that, particularly over in Europe right now. They're a little more strict than we are. And even though in the political environment in the United States right now is kind of diminishing of what ESG requirements are going to happen. That's going to ebb and flow. I don't think it's going to change. I mean, climate change is real, and I think that's probably a better word to use than global warming because that's scary. So I think there's going to be important things there for CFOs across any industry to understand how can I help my company be compliant, but at the same time I don't want to load up a lot of costs, but I want to make it efficient, and I want to make sure that we're not burdening the performance of the company, because obviously companies are valued on revenue growth and earnings growth primarily, but you're going to have compliance issues, or you're just going to have lack of desirability to even attract people to work for your company if you're not thinking about those things.
What about cybersecurity? Turning that is like a top one or two, almost everyone I talked to this year.
So that's a huge one for boards right now. The interesting thing about it from a board member perspective is we are liable as board members to have oversight over cyber risk within public companies. And the issue there is, as board members, we're advisors, so what responsibility do I have? Well, to make sure you have a program in place. And so I don't think it's absolutely a top priority for the entire C-suite, but particularly for board members right now, there's a lot of pressure on us to make sure that the companies are not just doing a surface compliance around risk management around cyber. And after last week's Snowflake incident, that's kind of interesting. And nothing against Snowflake. I mean, a lot of companies are getting attacked all the time, and so there's the point of over control too, where you can't, because it's just not going to be profitable. But there's a lot of things you can do to certainly protect yourself and be recognized that you did the best you possibly could. So having a program is going to be important. So cyber risk, in terms of the software tools your company is using and getting the right ones, vetting those, making sure that those companies are going to be around and that they actually have the infrastructure to support whatever volume you have is going to be really important, and that they actually are informing you of policies and procedures that you should be putting in place. Just like Snowflake did, they said, hey, we told our customers to put in multi-factor authentication, and some people didn't, and that's kind of stupid on them. I also think it was a little unfortunate that Snowflake blamed their customers versus kind of say that we're going to take the lead here to help you resolve this. There was an opportunity there that I think would have elevated their reputation at this point, so hopefully they come around. Yeah.
Kathleen?
What are your thoughts on supplier consolidation, arguments for and against it, various dimensions?
Yeah, so that obviously was a big issue during COVID, right, where certain companies got hurt and there wasn't even consolidation, there was just supply chain went out the door. There's going to be continued consolidation across a lot of industries, I think, just from operational efficiency and also de-risking. And there's also investors looking for where there's value. So if companies can come together and consolidate and actually be more profitable, that's going to drive a lot of that consolidation. But I do think that's a risk for companies that end up in a sole sourcing situation. So it's important to understand the types of terms and conditions and the ongoing reporting and compliance that's necessary if you end up in that situation. One of my companies that I'm on the board of, they will say they're not sole sourced in a certain area. They're absolutely sole sourced in a certain area. They have they have a secondary supplier, but actually doesn't provide the exact same services and components into where the product evolves to and then goes to this other supplier. They're saying this other supplier could do it, but they don't even have the raw materials here. It's like they're getting the product halfway through the manufacturing process, and then all of a sudden, they're adding to it. So they can't even get to that part if this supplier goes down. The other thing is you can have an issue in the consolidation if that supplier, for some reason, has a massive non-compliance issue and government entities shut them down. That's going to be a big issue too. So I feel like it is going to continue to happen. You guys have to strategize about how do I minimize that risk, and if I end up with a sole supplier situation, because is there anybody else that I can decouple the process so I can farm parts of it out? And that's a way to at least have some control over that sole supplier holding you hostage. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to get your thoughts on balance of trade. I see that becoming more of a theme with this.
Yeah.
This solid dividing line in the past, and it's now the same I see CFOs pursue.
So repeat the question if you would.
Yeah, so the questions on balance of trade, it becoming more of kind of a talking point. for me, it was always a talking point. It always drove me crazy that I would find myself paying someone more than they're giving back to me, and I feel like that's a really great beginning negotiating path for you with your suppliers, particularly if you're adding value, and you need to work with your sales organization here very, very closely and partner with them to understand what your opportunities are, because sometimes the sales organization will continue to sell in. They're motivated to sell your products, your services, et cetera, and they get this great deal done. At the same time, when you think about it from the cost perspective, what you're paying to the other company, the other company's sitting back there saying, this is great. Yeah, we're getting great deals from these guys, and we're milking them at the same time. So we're getting great savings on our cost of whatever service or product they're buying, and we're milking the company on what they're buying from us. So I think that's always open for negotiation, particularly even if you're in the center of a contract, in the middle of a contract period, reopen it. If all of a sudden you see yourself really out of whack with a particular supplier, my guess is there'll be a little pushback, but they'll actually want to come and negotiate and be a good partner on both ends of it. But your sales organization can super help you there.
Are there any lines that you have to be careful not to cross in that stuff?
Yeah, you definitely have to be careful in terms of sharing the pricing negotiation with your sales organization. You don't want the sales organization saying, "Hey, I understand you're bidding on this stuff over here. We'll get you that bid in our company, but you got to get us this." You can't have that double dealing happening. That's completely unethical. But it does happen, and so within your own companies and your processes and how you operate as an organization, doing a lot of training with your sales organization and explain to them why they cannot do that is very, very important. That's something that Conrad was super tied into our sales organization, had great relationships with Frieder, our CRO at the time, and Matt Thompson, who was our CRO before that. I mean, those guys always gave information to the procurement organization. So they said, what can we do? What can we say? What's gray, if it needs to be in the gray, but what's the black and white? And I think we did a good job.
Yeah, for sure.
Your view of insourcing versus outsourcing? I would like to know from a company like besides the boxes, which is not gigantic yet, and then what did you see at Adobe?
Okay. Well, maybe we should talk about Qualcomm out above. There's a bit of outsourcing going on there. It depends. I feel like companies have philosophies around this. So my feeling is, you should insource your highest intellectual talent so that you can absolutely have a competitive advantage to whatever your product or service is. And you should think about how you can efficiently outsource to an organization or a company that can do things at scale, and they're able to leverage their buying power to be able to get it more efficient for you. But you also have to think about where that is, how they will interact with your company in terms of just the business hours and things like that. How do you support the business? If you could go the other way and outsource so many, let's say, administrative things, but all of a sudden everything comes to a halt because you can't get an invoice paid, you can't get legal terms edited quickly enough, you can't respond to the sales organization quickly enough. So it has to be a holistic view of philosophically, what does the company need, and probably it's not, I won't say anything out of school about Qualcomm in this case because it was pretty public at the time, but Qualcomm was very heavy located in San Diego, and employee engineers, employee payroll, employee accounts payable. I remember when I went there and I looked at the payroll department, and it was a large company, and we were about $25 billion in revenue. But I looked at the payroll department, and we were using outside payroll service like ADP, but the payroll department was massive. I couldn't. I think I had. Do you remember how many people there were?
20+.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. I'm like, I've never seen that big of a payroll organization. I've seen an HR department maybe that big, but not a payroll department. So that was just crazy, and that obviously was an opportunity, and we did take that. But I think really kind of understanding. And I'll back up why Qualcomm ended up in that position. So the founder of the company, Irvin Jacobs, he founded the company. He founded a number of companies, but he founded that one. That one blew up. And his whole thing was he chose San Diego because he was a professor at UC San Diego, and he wanted to be part of the community. and he wanted to employ people in the community and contribute to the community. So that's how they ended up with such a concentration of employees. 13,000 employees, I think, in San Diego at that time, over 40 some odd buildings. I mean, the real estate portfolio was incredibly crazy. And when we got into trouble and we had the hedge fund get involved, the activists, what we were able to save by actually optimizing and offshoring and outsourcing certain activities, that couple of $1 billion that we took out of our operating expenses was not that hard, but it was painful culturally. And so I feel like we can, if you were thinking about this more holistically around where activities should be done insourced or outsourced, you can avoid a very big culture hit to a company and actually continue to optimize your efficiency. You bet.
So Conrad, you mentioned that you guys had worked together at Adobe, and we talked about cost management and cost savings. And obviously there's more value than that, right, that a sourcing team can bring. But what were some of the other ways that you measured? Because some of those other things are not as tangible, right? Cost management is very tangible. But what are some of the other things that you looked at to measure the success of the procurement team?
Speed.
Okay.
Yeah, responsiveness was really key. I think deploying technology within the organization was really key to helping Conrad and his team be viewed as valued partners because they were getting the support and the quickness of that. I think the other thing that's really important besides just cost savings is understanding risk, supply chain risk, supplier risk, compliance risk. People in engineering don't want to hear about it every day. Manufacturers don't want to hear about it. They're just trying to produce. They're trying to get product finished so that they can actually ship it, whether it be software or hardware or a physical product. So the more that you're contributing to their ability to move at speed, but actually keeping them compliant along the way, which protects the company, that's a strategic value add for me, especially as a CFO and a board member.
I think the procurement leadership has changed from being all about traditional procurement to being procurement and risk. Like the title of CPO to me, I think kind of needs to go away, and it's now procurement and risk, right? The two of them have to come in hand in hand. This is a great question because I think traditionally it's so easy to say cost savings, even with our own teams, because it's measurable. And I never really felt like there was a wonderful way to put it on a graph and chart it, this idea of enabling business success. Yeah. But what I always strive for was when the senior leadership of the company meets with the CFO, do they complain about purchasing, or they say, we're so thankful for purchasing because procurement actually enabled us to meet all these aggressive goals that you put in place for us as the business. We're so glad that procurement team is in place. Invest a little bit more in them. And there's like a crossover point where you have the trust that you're talking about, Linda, where it goes from they're in my way to I couldn't live without them. And that, to me, is a big driver because you meet with your leadership team, that's everything right there.
And that actually brings up a really good point. Oftentimes procurement is reacting to something that's already happened, or not even a crisis, but just like, wow, this got away from me. Some CFOs are very protective of information, and particularly the plan. They don't want it getting out. I think that's really a bad way of operating as a financial person. I feel like you're not leveraging the capability that a procurement organization, if they're informed what the plan looks like, what they can actually prepare for. I was thinking just about when we ended up in various labor shortages and we're scrambling for working at the right contract labor, at the right skill level, at the right price, not overpay for it because we're asking at the last minute. Knowing that, hey, we expect revenue to grow X, that's going to, depending on what your business is, that requires X number of engineers and programmers, et cetera. That requires X number of infrastructure capabilities and networking capabilities and all the things that go along to enable those people. If you understand that and you know when that's going to happen, the procurement department can be like, we're ready to go, you're ready to onboard them. But if you're sitting there saying, okay, I just hired 300 people and I can't even get them a laptop, that's a problem. That's a real big problem. I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure it's happened to you guys before. That to me is just a missed opportunity for people in my seat, or my old seat.
So I'm going to squeeze in a couple of questions. advice for procurement leaders from a career perspective.
Yeah.
Not everybody, believe me, you don't all want to be a founder. It's not an easy path, but you kind of grow up through the procurement function. You're in the enterprise.
Yeah.
How would you think about that as a procurement leader to add value and learn whatever that is?
Yeah.
What comes to your mind?
You know, and he prepped me with that question beforehand, and I gave it a lot of thought because I feel like I've always been a big believer that smart people can pretty much do anything, but there are the skill sets that procurement people bring to the table in terms of planning, analytics, negotiation, understanding costing, especially, without a doubt. So I feel like depending on the company you're in, looking at if you want to broaden kind of your skill set, even just for a tour of duty, if you will, going into the engineering organization in a costing perspective, a costing mindset, because oftentimes they don't like to do that part. They want to build, they want to get the budget, and they just want to build. I think in financial planning as well, I think that's a very key component of you understand the downstream impact, but a financial planning analyst often is just doing the math, and they're getting inputs from the business, and the businesses. I don't want to say they sandbag, but they do, but they also ask for more than they need. And so I think that puts a lot of pressure on the whole company. So if you're, like for instance, when we'd be building a plan at Adobe or at Qualcomm or wherever, every business would ask for everything under the sun. And I'm like, okay, well, that's going to increase costs like 15, 20%. We're only growing at 7 or 8%. That's not going to work. That math is bad. We go bankrupt. So you're kind of saying, okay, what do you absolutely need to achieve what we need on the top line? And so I feel like you can add a lot of value in that process in the financial planning function just because you know the immediate impact of the costs that you're contributing to, or you're actually helping them save, or you're actually getting more efficient. So that's a career path that would be an interesting one to step into for a while. That would potentially, depending on the company, lead to a COO opportunity for somebody. Having the understanding of what it takes to deliver, but how you actually manage it financially the most effective way.
Cool. Thank you.
You bet. Absolutely.
I didn't even think about the COO. One more question.
Okay.
Leadership lesson. Like, what would you tell your younger self about leadership to help you through the process?
Well, I innately believe this as a person coming through public accounting, because if anyone understands that world, it's like you're hazed in the first 3 years of your entire career. And I went to Pricewaterhouse, which great prestigious firm, and then you realize you're working there for the first couple of years and you're like a grunt. You're wearing and back in my day anyway, we were wearing nice suits. I'm in New York City, and I'm feeling like I graduated, I made it, and I'm carrying boxes of paper all over Manhattan in August in 89-degree weather and 90% humidity, and I'm sweating through my nice suit. And I'm this sucks. That to me was we're wasting talent, and and I kind of brushed the grain of the firm a little bit and kind of pushing back on some things. I felt why did I go to school? In my case, I had a lot of student loan debt at that point too. I'm I need to do something more productive and feel good about myself. And so I ended up leaving the firm. I went to one of my clients, and I realized that I had a great boss who trusted in my skills to be able to add value to the function I was doing at the time. And that evolved as I became a leader into hire the best people, let them do their job, stay in communication all the time, do not micromanage them. And to me, that is the best lesson possible, because what you'll see is that people are really creative, right? You end up hiring someone that you're micromanaging, they have to clear everything through you. When you're not getting the most value out of them, you're not getting the best thinking out of them, and then they become paralyzed in terms of creativity, and I think that's a real shame. And I think that companies that do that end up hampering their own growth. And when you see companies that allow people to kind of have a bit of breathing room, responsibility, controlled responsibility, I think you end up with a better outcome.
Yeah. Well, thank you, John.
You bet. Absolutely.
I mean, you epitomized that with me. I can tell you that. It was really great to work with John. Thank you for taking some time with us.
Yeah, you bet. Absolutely. Happy to be here.